My name is Daniel Reed. I'm 53 years old, and I spent most of my life in uniform. I served in the United States Marine Corps for over 25 years. But if you ask me what title I'm most proud of, it's not sergeant, it's dad. I lost my wife when our son, Jeremy, was just 3. Cancer doesn't care how strong you are or how much you love someone. One day, she was there, reading him bedtime stories. Next, I was folding her flag and holding a toddler who couldn't understand where his mom had gone. Raising Jeremy alone wasn't in any battle manual I trained with. Between deployments, late-night missions, and trying to keep a boy fed, safe, and loved, I often felt like I was failing at everything. But each morning, when he smiled at me with that same crooked grin his mother had, I remembered why I had to keep going. There were nights when he fell asleep in my arms while I still had dirt and gun oil on my hands. I missed birthdays, school plays, first days, and last games. I tried to make it up with letters, video calls, and all the love I could fit into a care package. He grew up faster than I wanted, tougher than I expected, kinder than I ever dared hope. People told me I should have left the Corps to focus on him. Maybe they were right. But that uniform put food on the table and gave me a way to show him what discipline, duty, and honor meant. He learned to tie his boots and his tie from a man who never stopped trying. I always told myself if he turned out to be a good man, it would all be worth it. And he did. He really did. That's why, when I got the wedding invitation with his name on it, I felt something swell in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Not pride as a soldier, but pride as a father. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because I had just finished polishing the old photo frames on the mantle. His graduation, our trip to Yosemite. One of him as a boy, standing on my shoulders, arms out like airplane wings. When I saw the wedding seal, my hands paused midair, heart thudding somewhere behind my ribs. I sat down before opening it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was reverence. I had waited a long time for this moment. Seeing his name in gold script brought a smile to my face that I hadn't felt in years. Jeremy Reed, marrying Allison Walker. I whispered it aloud like a prayer. The card was elegant, thick, and formal. Everything I would have wanted for him. The details were precise: venue, time, dress code, and RSVP. Then I saw it. Beneath a neat table diagram, my name was printed. Daniel Reed. Not the father of the groom, not even Mr. Reed. Just Daniel, transport assistant. I read it again and again. My eyes searched the paper like maybe it was a joke, like maybe this was a misprint or some sort of inside detail I had missed. But it wasn't. There it was, in black and white. That was who I was to them. To him. For a long time, I didn't move. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock and the rustling of that paper in my hand. My thumb kept brushing the words, hoping they'd shift or blur. I waited for a second envelope. Something hidden in the folds. A note, a laugh, nothing came. I got up and walked to the kitchen, just to have something to do. I poured a glass of water and didn't drink it. I stared at the sink, at my reflection in the window, and tried to swallow the ache building in my chest. I had been through war zones. I had heard explosions ring out in the dead of night. But this silence, that single title stripped of meaning, cut deeper than anything. Maybe he had a reason. Maybe there was a mix-up. Maybe someone else handled the invitations. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But something deep down told me this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, chosen. I stood in the living room, holding the card like a report from some distant command, and tried to make sense of it. How does a father become a footnote? How does a man who gave up so much get listed as a driver? I didn't cry. Not then. I told myself I was being dramatic. Told myself the wedding was more about the couple than me. Told myself it didn't matter. But inside, something folded, quietly, without sound. And for the first time in years, I felt like I didn't belong in my own story. I wore my full dress blues that morning. Polished the brass, straightened every seam, made sure the creases stood sharp. It wasn't just about looking proper. It was the one uniform that still made me feel like myself. like I hadn't faded into the background. The hotel valet handed me the keys without a glance. The mother of the bride called me Daniel, followed by a clipped instruction to have the van ready in 10 minutes. I nodded, not correcting her, not telling her I was the groom's father. It didn't seem like the place for truths no one wanted. Inside the van, the women chatted about flowers and table settings. I caught phrases like classic elegance and guest list prestige. No one spoke to me. No one asked who I was beyond the wheel. And I stayed quiet because what could I say that wouldn't make it worse? At the venue, I parked where they told me. Someone handed me a schedule, not with my name but with the title transport team. I stood there for a long moment, unsure where to go. A planner waved me toward the back. I found my name taped to a small seat at table 14, near the kitchen doors. The guests filed in. Laughter, champagne flutes, silk dresses brushing past my shoulder. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, military posture holding my back straighter than my heart could manage. People at my table smiled politely. One asked if I worked security. I smiled back and said I was just helping out. I looked around, hoping Jeremy would spot me and nod, wave, something. But he didn't. He was busy, as he should be. It was his day. That's what I kept repeating in my mind like a drumbeat. His day, not mine. Still, as I watched him laughing beside his bride, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been left outside something I helped build. Like a man who poured the foundation and was never invited inside the house. And that uniform I once wore with pride felt heavier than ever. I stepped out to the side yard just before the ceremony started. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of grass and distant rain. I needed a moment to breathe, to collect myself before I had to pretend again. That's when I heard them. Two women, voices hushed but sharp, standing just beyond the flower arch. One of them said she assumed the groom's father had passed. The other replied no, she thought the man in uniform was just someone hired to help. That's what she heard. Just the driver. My feet stayed planted, but everything inside me moved. Not one mention of who I was, what I'd done. I had been to him. The years of night shifts, scraped knees, science projects at midnight, sitting through fevered nights alone with a wet cloth and prayers. All of it erased. All of it unspoken. The wind picked up then, tugging at the hem of my jacket. I looked up at the gray sky, wondering if the rain would fall or just tease me like the rest of the day had. I remembered a day when Jeremy was 5, when he asked if I thought his mom could see us from the clouds. I had said yes, I had to believe it. Now I wondered what she would think of this. Of her boy standing tall, smiling in a tux, while the man who raised him stood in the shadows. I tried not to feel bitter. I told myself he had his reasons. Maybe he didn't know how to explain to me. Maybe he thought it didn't matter. Maybe I mattered less than I thought. I stood still in that cold, quiet air for longer than I should have. Just a man in dress blues, outside the frame of every photo. I didn't cry. But my jaw tightened and my hands curled, not in anger, just to keep something from slipping. And in that silence, I realized something that hurt more than being forgotten. I hadn't been erased. I had been hidden. The clinking of glasses had just died down when Jeremy stood and picked up the mic. His new wife reached for his hand, smiling, but he looked out across the room. His voice was steady at first, thanking guests, sharing memories, light jokes about high school friends and in-laws. I sat quietly at table 14, half listening, still tucked away behind a pillar and a catering cart. Then he paused. The air shifted, like the moment right before a storm breaks. He cleared his throat and said there was one person he hadn't mentioned yet. Someone who didn't get seated at the family table. Someone who wasn't listed as the father of the groom in the program. Someone who should have been. Heads turned. I felt the weight of every eye as he raised his hand and pointed across the room. Then he said my name, Daniel Reed. My father, my hero. I didn't move at first. I thought maybe I had misheard him. But he kept talking. About how I raised him alone after Mom died. How I put aside every promotion, every transfer, every dream of command, just to make sure he had dinner every night and a steady home when I could manage it. How I taught him to tie his shoes, then his tie, and later, how to stand up for himself, quietly but firmly. He said he hadn't told anyone at the wedding who I was because he wanted to save this moment. He wanted people to see not just a Marine in uniform or a quiet man in the back, but a father who had given up everything so his son could have a shot at something more. He wanted to say it when everyone was listening, when it would matter most. My chest tightened. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I looked down at them, resting on the table like they didn't belong to me. The room had gone still, not a fork or breath out of place. It was just his voice and my heart pounding behind my ribs. He called me the most honorable man he'd ever known. Said I never asked for thanks, never demanded recognition, but I deserved both. He said he was proud of the man he had become, but he was even prouder of the man who made him that way. And in that moment, everything I thought I'd lost came rushing back like sunlight after a storm. Jeremy walked across the floor and stopped right in front of me. He held out his hand and looked at me the way he used to when he was small and scared and just wanted to be near. I stood slowly, not sure my legs would hold, but they did. He guided me toward the head table, past every row of guests, past stunned silence and teary eyes. He pulled out a chair right next to his, the one reserved for the guest of honor. I didn't know where to look. People clapped, some stood, but all I saw was his face. He smiled like he did when he made his first basket, when he got into college, when he hugged me at boot camp graduation. Proud, certain, unshakable. Then Allison stood. Her dress shimmered as she stepped forward, and for a second I thought she might say something polite and rehearsed. Instead, she walked right up to me, looked me in the eye, and said thank you for raising the man she loved. For every late night, every sacrifice, every quiet lesson that shaped the person she chose to spend her life with. She reached into a small velvet pouch and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years. My purple heart. I had tucked it away in a drawer long ago, never wanting to display it. Not because I wasn't proud, but because it reminded me of what I'd lost. She pressed it gently into my hand and said it belonged with me today. Because this day was about love and sacrifice and showing up no matter what. My throat tightened. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. I looked down at the medal, then up at her, then at my son, and I knew. Whatever pain I had carried walking in here, whatever doubts or quiet shame, they didn't belong to me anymore. They had been lifted, replaced by something stronger. That night, I sat beside my son as he toasted to love and loyalty, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a man on the outside looking in. I felt like family. I've thought a lot about that day since. Not just the wedding, but everything leading up to it. The long nights, the early mornings. The years of packing lunches in base housing while trying to remember if I had ironed my uniform. The scraped knees, the missed birthdays, the way he used to fall asleep in the passenger seat of my old pickup with his head against the window and his shoelaces untied. I didn't raise Jeremy expecting medals or speeches. I didn't keep food on the table or a roof over our heads because I wanted him to stand up in a room full of people and call me a hero. I did it because that's what you do when you're a father. You carry the weight, even when no one sees it. When that invitation came with my name printed like I was a stranger, I'll admit something broke inside me. It wasn't anger, it was hurt. Not because I wasn't acknowledged, but because I thought, maybe for a moment, that he had forgotten who we were. But that day proved something else. He hadn't forgotten. He had planned it all. Every quiet glance, every silence, every seat on the edge of the room. It was part of a story he wanted to tell the right way. And I realize now, it wasn't about proving anything to me. It was about showing the world that sometimes the quietest man in the room holds the loudest truth. That speech, that moment when he stood in front of everyone and gave me back my place, not just as his father but as the man who shaped his life. It healed something in me I didn't know still needed healing. And when Allison handed me the purple heart I thought I'd buried for good, I understood why she was the one for him. She saw me the way he did. With gratitude, with depth, with heart. I didn't walk out of that wedding with bitterness. I didn't carry home resentment or regret. I carried hope, a deeper kind than I'd known before. Not hope for recognition, but hope that the love we pour into others does come back. Sometimes late, sometimes in unexpected ways, but it returns. A few months after the wedding, they called to say they were expecting a little girl, due in the spring. Jeremy asked if I'd consider moving closer, maybe into the next town over. I didn't even hesitate. I packed up my place, sold the old pickup, and found a quiet rental with a yard that gets good afternoon light. These days, I spend my mornings walking with their dog and my afternoons building a rocking chair for the nursery. On weekends, we grill out back and talk about things that matter. I don't wear my uniform anymore, but I kept one patch. It's framed now, hanging in their hallway next to wedding photos and a tiny pair of pink baby socks. Some people think stories like mine are about pain, or forgiveness, or redemption. But really, they're about remembering. Remembering who we are when no one is looking, remembering the promises we make in silence, remembering the ones who carried us when we didn't know we needed carrying. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that legacy isn't built in medals or titles. It's built in lunchboxes, bedtime stories, long drives in silence, and hands that never let go even when everything else does. I never wanted revenge, I never wanted applause. I just wanted to know that he remembered, and now I know he did. That's enough.